All right, folks, welcome to the Friday edition of the Steve Malzberg Show. And because the news doesn't know from the weekend, as they say, it's a very busy news day. You're in the right place. Just about an hour ago, the news broke and the sentence came in the life or death phase, death penalty phase of the trial of the Boston bomber. And I am very happy to say that he has been sentenced to death. Now, this was a Massachusetts jury. There was some question as to whether or not they could find that one juror that would hold out and force the judge to put him in prison for life. But they were unanimous. They heard from plenty of witnesses, and it took more than 14 hours for them to reach this decision, which I don't think is all that long considering, but we'll get the expert opinion of two of our guests in just a second. It's interesting, you know, some people say he would have been better off rotting in that high-security prison they were talking about, where 23 hours a day he'd be in isolation and he'd be in a little box, you know, a little cell that you could barely reach your arms out, a little 2x4 cell, so to speak. I don't think so. I mean, I know he's going to have years of appeals, and that's unfortunate, but that's the way we operate. And it will be justice the day that he is put to death. Unfortunately, it's going to be too humane. You know, they'll either give him a pill by then, or maybe a robot will blink and it'll end his life, you know, by the time he goes to death. Who knows what they'll come up with. But what they should do is strap little tiny explosives on his body parts. Starting with his private part, they should blow them up one by one. That's the death he deserves. Unfortunately, we don't do that to scum like him. We treat him too well. Joining us now to correct me on all these horrific things I just said are two great legal minds: Adam Thompson, senior partner and owner of the law offices of Adam Thompson, and of course talk show host as well, and Heather Hansen, trial attorney and columnist for HNGN.com. Welcome to both of you. Let me start with you, Heather. Are you surprised by the decision to put him to death?
Steve, I actually was surprised. Given the venue, Boston is notoriously very liberal. They don't have the death penalty in Massachusetts. The only reason it was on the table here is because it's a federal case. On top of that, all the polls that you saw in that community were highly skewed in favor of life in prison. Add to that the fact that some of the victims actually wrote op-eds that were on the front page of the Boston Globe, including the parents of the young boy who died, saying that they did not want the death penalty. And I really felt like this jury would be somehow influenced by that notion and go for life in prison. So I was surprised.
And Adam, let's speak to that young boy's parents. The reason they didn't want the death penalty was they said they don't want this to carry on. They didn't want to have to go through appeal after appeal after appeal, and they also feared that they might be called to testify again somehow. And they just didn't want. They just wanted to end it and have it done away with. And by giving him death, somehow it keeps it going. Could you see that point of view?
Absolutely. They were afraid that because of the appeal process and the number of years that it takes, I mean, there's an appeal after an appeal after an appeal. It could take 5 years on the low end, as much as 10 years on the upper end. And they might have been called back into court to have to give a victim impact statement all over again. These families want closure. They want to put this behind them. They don't want to have to keep
Tried her darndest to make this a life sentence, But for him, you know, the fact that he didn't testify, the fact that all of the witnesses that they called that you spoke of were people who knew them years and years ago and not people who knew them more recently, leads me to think that perhaps the people that knew them more recently would actually say that the manifesto that he wrote in the wall of that boat when he was waiting to see whether or not he would be captured is true, and this may be exactly what he wants.
Well, all right, now let me give you some statistics, folks. Since the federal ban on the ban on the federal death penalty was lifted, since 1983, only 3 people that I could see have been put to death under the federal death penalty, and the last one was in 2003. And this is also the first time a federal jury has sentenced a terrorist to death in the post-9/11 era, according to a director of the Federal Death Penalty Resource Council Project, as quoted in the New York Times. So what about it? I mean, Adam, how long? I mean, you speculated on how long this could take, but you got 61 people sitting on death row, federally speaking. I mean, is he going to grow old sitting on death row?
It's going to be at least 5 to 10 years at a minimum. And just to follow up on the last point, I want to just clarify something that Heather was saying, because it's so on point, that when you try these kind of cases, your goal is just to avoid death. You just need one holdout juror. Think of the Jodi Arias trial. There really was just some holdout. She didn't get the death penalty.
Right.
If you really want your client not to get the death penalty, who do you want the story to be told from the most? It's the actual defendant. He never testified. And mark my words, if he got the opportunity to sit in that witness stand and he had to testify, I would have no doubt he would have said things that would have went down the road to be a martyr, which he inscribed on the boat, as we all know. That's why he didn't get near the witness stand. His lawyers and defense team.
All right, well, then let me ask you for my Adam, for my own clarification here and education. Did he have to have this defense? In other words, was it a hostile defense, so to speak? Did the client not want that defense presented? Did he not want his aunt called to the stand? Or will not the jihadists all over the world see that he, in fact, waged a hard defense to prevent himself from being killed?
I think it makes him out more to be a martyr, knowing if he goes down this path and then he is put to death at the discretion or the decision of a jury, then hey, it makes him all that more a martyr in the eyes.
Yeah, but Heather,
yeah.
could he have said to his defense team, "I don't want you," or "Don't call witnesses, don't push the mitigation, I want to die," without taking the stand? He could have told that to his defense team. Am I right or wrong?
You're right, and it's interesting. You know, we'll never know what went on behind closed doors, but it's interesting because the Unabomber was also represented by the same defense attorney. He did not want to go with the insanity defense. She insisted upon it. To make a long story short, the judge made him do it, and that's why he entered a plea. So yes, he could have said, "I don't want to defend this case. I want to go to death right away." And we don't know what happened behind closed doors as far as that, but ultimately they put on a defense. So you're right in that regard. Ultimately, they put on a defense here.
Yeah, well, it's
Steve, it never happens. If I could just jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because in the appellate process, they would just say, here's someone that was facing the death penalty, went unrepresented without counsel. They will always assign counsel to advise them at the minimum, but they always end up having counsel represent them, and counsel has to make the right decisions, so they end up calling the shots. If they don't call witnesses, it looks like they did an incompetent job, and then they're open for a potential claim later on. They're always going to call the shots, and they're going to make the decisions. That's really the bottom line.
Heather, where do you think he got the money? Was this like a pro bono thing for the notoriety, or is this did he have to pony up hundreds of thousands of dollars for this defense team?
The taxpayers are paying for it, Steve.
But don't taxpayers just pay? In other words, you could have the lawyer of your choice and have the taxpayers pay for it, or don't they? Wouldn't it be assigned like a what word am I looking for?
A public defender.
Yeah. How come he got such high caliber representation? What?
There's a whole panel of top criminal attorneys that only handle death penalties.
Yeah. So how did he get that?
Well, they're on a panel.
Those
What
ones that
happens
are
is you assign the lawyer.
All right, gotcha. All right, guys, thanks for coming on short notice. Adam Thompson, Heather Hansen, we'll see you both very soon. Debbie Lee joins us next, and she's angry. We'll tell you why.